The News Day continues here on One News Now. I'm Charles Lejano. The Health Department warns of a possible spike in local COVID cases if protocol violations persist. JC Cosico tells us more in this report.
At least 31 voters were sent home for isolation after experiencing COVID-19 symptoms on Election Day. The Health Department said they were referred to local health centers for further evaluation.
Wala naman po tayong nakita, na may severe, for example, na mga simptomas na nagpunta talaga doon.
They are among the 644 people who had health issues in polling centers. 57 were sent to hospitals.
May pagtaas ng presyon, maaring dulot ng init, maaring dulot dun sa marami kasing tao, so medyo nagkaroon po sila ng ganitong mga simptomas. And then the rest ay mga minor lang naman po ang naitala.
Protocol violations such as lack of physical distancing were observed in some voting centers. With this, the DOH once again warned of a spike in COVID-19 cases by May if health violations persist. Authorities said the effect of poll day activities in the number of infections may be seen in 2 weeks.
We know that the incubation period of the virus is 14 days, but we know that also because of these variants, it may be shorter than 14 days.
The public is reminded anew to wear face masks properly and self-monitor for COVID-19 symptoms. Meanwhile, over 7,400 were jabbed in 333 temporary COVID-19 vaccination sites set up in polling venues. For News 5, JC Cosico, we are One News.
Presumptive Vice President Sara Duterte Carpio will focus on implementing mandatory ROTC once she's appointed as the country's education secretary. This was confirmed by Duterte Carpio's close friend, Attorney Bruce Rivera, on 1PH's Wagpo. Rivera said that aside from the mandatory ROTC, Duterte Carpio will also look into alternative modes of learning for the youth.
This is a good portfolio for Inday because it's very important yan yun. In light of so many things that's happening to us, na yung level ng edukasyon medyo kailangan tutukan. So I'm personally happy. Something new and something that is, a welcome appointment.
Education Secretary Leonor Briones welcomes the possibility of Vice Presidential frontrunner Sara Duterte Carpio getting appointed as the agency's new chief. However, the Teachers' Dignity Coalition says teachers would prefer a DepEd secretary from their ranks, someone who had previous experience in the education sector. But should Duterte Carpio be appointed, the group says that they want to share with her the concrete experiences and problems faced by educators. The group believes her plans for DepEd may come from the outside looking in, which is why they want to share with her their 13-point dignity agenda to improve the education sector. The College Editors Guild of the Philippines, meanwhile, described as hell for the youth and the next generation the possible appointment of Duterte Carpio as Education Secretary. The CEGP believes that she's not qualified to lead and represent the education sector, citing her supposed history of violence, abuse, and impunity, liking her to her father, President Duterte. The group urges campus journalists and the youth to condemn the planned appointment. Student group Student Christian Movement of the Philippines also condemns Marcos's plan to appoint Duterte Carpio, saying this is a move to indoctrinate minds of the Filipino youth. The group also condemned Duterte Carpio's push for mandatory ROTC, saying schools must serve toward critical thinking, patriotism, and liberating education. And the SCMP says presumptive vice president will only become a, quote, mal-education secretary. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. secured the largest vote share for a president since his dictator father won a boycotted election 4 decades ago. Here's what the son's landslide victory means.
More than 3 decades ago, the Philippines ousted dictator Ferdinand Marcos. Now, his son has swept to power in the 2022 presidential elections. Marcos's decisive win is not a surprise. Experts attribute this to his running mate Sara Duterte, the president's daughter who won as vice president. That also means that Marcos is likely to continue Duterte's policies, including in the economy and foreign affairs.
Marcos Jr. also received support from political clans like the Garcias of Cebu, the country's second-largest city, and this contributed to his win, are reporting finds. Some observers also attribute Marcos's win to online disinformation, painting the dictatorship in a positive light. Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa said disinformation will likely continue under a Marcos presidency.
Marcos plans to focus on pandemic recovery, especially small businesses and tourism. He has also pledged to prioritize infrastructure and agriculture. He has depicted his father's rule as a golden age for these industries, despite economic downturn at that time. Marcos plans to maintain the Philippines' military alliance with the U.S., saying it's beneficial to both countries.
That's after President Duterte shook up the defense alliance, at times threatening to end agreements with Washington.
He's also seen as friendly to China and wants a bilateral deal with Beijing to settle tensions in the South China Sea.
In other news, Meralco customers are set to enjoy lower rates this month. This as the power distributor was ordered to refund nearly 8 billion pesos of overcollection over the past years. Shaila Francisco tells us more.
After 2 succeeding months of rate increase, Meralco customers will be able to save up this month. This comes as Meralco announced that electricity rates for May will go down by 12 centavos per kilowatt hour. This is equivalent to 24 to 60 pesos reduction in the power bill. The decrease comes amid the Energy Regulatory Commission's order to refund some 7.8 billion pesos of overcollection from 2011 to 2015. This means residential customers can see a reduction of 46 centavos starting May until the next 12 months. This offset the expected increase in generation charges. But the distribution company is not yet sure whether this decline will continue considering the high demand expected next month.
Ang pinakamagalaw na component ng ating bill ay yung generation charge. And it's also the single largest component of the bill. Kaya yun usually magpapagalaw sa overall rate ng Meralco. What makes the generation charge move are various factors including the fuel price, the exchange rate, and also the supply-demand situation. Historically, ang pinakamataas na level of consumption for a household is May and June. So pagpasok na ng rainy season, mga July, that's when we see the average household consumption start to go down.
Meanwhile, with Bongbong Marcos leading the presidential race, Meralco says his administration should focus on increasing power supply to lower rates further and prevent brownouts.
Pinakamalaking cost is supply, 50 to 60% of the bill. Well, we can improve basically the pricing mechanism if there will be more supply, meaning there will be more generation in the industry.
Ang pinakamalaking component ng taxes ngayon sa bill is the VAT, which is a percentage tax. Diba? It's a 12% tax rate. So if we can reduce the other components in the bill, that the VAT will also go down correspondingly. So what's really important is to reduce the cost of providing electric service, as Joe mentioned, and the biggest component is the generation cost. So if the industry can bring these down, including the other components na rin, then the VAT and the local franchise tax, which are percentage taxes, will also go down.
Meralco says looking into the energy mix can also be helpful.
Insofar as supply is concerned, the push really now is for renewables. No? But as far as the portfolio is concerned, there has to really be a balance in terms of the supply that one obtains. It's really a sourcing strategy that will meet the lowest cost possible. At the end of the day, the more supply there is, the better, I think, for the entire industry. Kasi syempre, just like any market, mas marami yung nagpo-provide ng supply, mas nagkakaroon ng mababang presyo.
Shaila Francisco, we are One News.
Here's a quick look at some of today's headlines. Presumptive President Bongbong Marcos is now creating his transition team as he prepares to return to Malacanang. With another Marcos set to become president, calls to preserve books on martial law are circulating online. And COMELEC declares failure of elections in some parts of Lanao del Sur. And those are the top stories at this hour. Join us again later at 11 a.m. as we continue to monitor the day's biggest stories. You can also catch One News on Signal Play. Register for a free account at www.signalplay.com so you can stream One News live anytime and anywhere. I'm Charles Lejano. Mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. We're One News.